Hello, everyone. My name is Pallavi Mande. I'm the Director of Blue Cities at the Charleston Watershed Association. Thank you again for filling the room. This is an honor that I see a lot of familiar faces, but also a lot of new faces. So I'm hoping over the course of the next 9 months, I can get to know each one of you. This was a little tricky, given that we only had 15 minutes and I was trying to pack my entire life in here. So I would apologize in advance if I get a little too carried away with some baggage that I need to offload early on. But it's important for me, as with all my colleagues, because as we've discovered over the last week that we've been together, a lot of our professional stories are actually very personal. So unless I get you a little bit into my context, where I'm coming from, I feel like I can't explain my work. So with this, I'll start, and hopefully Sally will flag me down if I go too far. So this is where I come from. I was born in India, and I did my undergrad in architecture. I went for a school that was an alternative school that looked at settlements. The mission of the school was really to look at not architecture with a capital A, instead studying where people live. It was called the School of Habitat Studies. It doesn't exist anymore. They sort of broke the mold after they created us. But early on, I came into the profession sort of understanding more about places and people rather than buildings. So that's where I started my journey, and I take the analogy of water just because that's my world now, and rivers. That's what I do for a living. So bear with me as I take you through the land into the sea. This is my early work, my undergrad dissertation, actually, that looked at the city of Delhi and the Yamuna. That's the big river that flows as a part of it, and looked at the urban natural drainage channel network. It's funny, I'm doing the same kind of work in Boston 20 years later, but that's where it started. This is what I had on my hands to deal with. In a year when the Redevelopment Authority in Delhi was looking at these drainage channels as pits of garbage and slums that could be covered by concrete and used as prime real estate. And my work basically looked at the opportunity and the potential challenge of taking that approach, knowing that we weren't that far from being inundated in our urban areas. And what a lot of this media was telling us, this is predating when we actually recognize and acknowledge climate change for what it is, was not a great idea. You know, these drainage channels perform an important ecological function, and so just covering them up and building on them, maybe not the best idea. Anyway, I was naive. I came up with some brilliant ideas and got a gold medal in my dissertation, but also was told, you know, these ideas are great, but you have a lot that you need to change to implement that. So maybe you want to learn a few things about how policy and city infrastructure really works before we can actually look at these ideas. So I took that and moved on to look at another infrastructure problem in Delhi. This was my thesis. And I was looking at housing and resettlement, sort of going back to the true mission of our institution and looking at people. This was a project right outside of the old city in Delhi, and a resettlement problem that we had our client, or my client, a community that was taken out of the old city, temporarily housed on a site with the hope that they will be moved back into the old city once we had infrastructure for them. Turns out that never happened, so these people were sort of in transit or transient neighborhoods for over a decade. and things changed, and eventually I was told this is a site that the DPW, or the DDA, which is the Development Authority, had allocated for new housing to be constructed. So being the design student I did a design solution, because otherwise I wouldn't graduate from a design school, architecture school. But also realized very quickly that this was more than a design solution. There was a planning policy complexity in place that couldn't be necessarily solved with a elegant design solution. So this was my sort of disillusionment with design and building early on, which sort of took me to look at where I want to go next to understand infrastructure. I was always drawn to water, not necessarily working on it all the time, but I then went on to do my first master's in something called Environment and Development at Cambridge. And I was hanging out with some mid-career professionals who were basically taking a year off from their busy careers in the World Bank, et cetera. And I was sort of the youngest in the group, not really knowing what I was doing there, except for the fact that I wanted to learn from everybody around me, much like now. But I wanted to focus on what I did know about, which was this specific settlement in India again, Khajuraho, that was going through a lot of development. And this was a sort of tourist destination, and the government was really looking at it from a sustainability standpoint and trying to figure out how they can actually promote the concept of ecotourism. I wouldn't say we understood very well what ecotourism was all about, but we were trying to. So my introduction to watershed level planning was actually came through this project, and the idea was to look at water systems and resource management from a community standpoint, and see exactly how we wanted to develop a sustainable tourism model in the area. Long story short, we developed plans. I completed my thesis. It was done for a great group, environmental NGO, nonprofit group that I was working with in Delhi, but it sort of sat on the shelf after that. And there have been plans developed for the area. I'm not quite sure how water-centric they are, but life goes on. I went back to design school, again, a little disillusioned with the whole policy end of things. This was way more policy than I could have handled, so I said, you know, I need to get back to design. Design has the solution, because I was really someone who was coming from that skill set, and I figured if I just knew what I needed to know for vocabulary for urban design and the tools I can use, I could address the problem a little better. So I went back to school to do urban design, sort of set within a given landscape. This is a studio we did in LA. Not as much landscape as I would have liked to learn about, so that's why I'm here now. Another studio that explored inner city redevelopment. This one had the river as a part of it, so it really gave me the opportunity to understand how inner city redevelopment can and should work with river systems. Of course, it was not really taking into account all the ecological ideas and frameworks that I was eventually going to develop, but at that time I was just looking at it from a purely urban design toolkit standpoint. Fast forward, I start to apply. I graduate from my second master's and start to apply a lot of these skills and tools that I've learned in school. Worked for a urban design planning firm, did inner city work in a lot of different cities around the US. Learned a lot about communicating ideas about design to people who didn't necessarily feel they had anything to gain from it. Um, I was good at being able to read cities and able to communicate ideas. Met some really smart people. Some of us are in the audience. I wouldn't embarrass them. But I had some really good mentors along the way who understood, what I was most interested in and where I was going with this work. But very soon I got sort of tired of doing the same thing again and again, and I kind of forgot where I was in terms of which city I was in, because I was sort of doing this like more of a formulaic approach. So I went on to look at regional planning, environmental planning, and trying to examine where I can situate this work in a given place and a context that probably would differ depending on where you were. And then realized that, again, a lot of this work was sitting on a shelf. It was great work, putting together guidelines for sustainable development, taking, environmental stuff in account, but it wasn't impacting communities that I wanted to really reach. So midlife crisis again, figuring out, okay, what do I want to do? I've done a lot of what design told me I should be looking at in terms of problems and solving them. So I decided to change my sector. From private consulting, I went to the nonprofit sector because I was told by a mentor that, if you really want to do stuff without the client telling you what to do, you need to be exploring a different avenue. So I started work with the Charles River Watershed Association almost 11 years ago. This was my first area. A lot of you who are from Boston might be familiar with this area. It's North Allston, right on the other side of the river. I started a lot of my work looking at cities and how water plays a role or doesn't play a role in cities. And what you see here is sort of looking at the natural hydrology of a place, what that tells us about how planning can and should be done based on history of land and water. And also what the current conditions might be, which are having some huge implications for how the river system works or doesn't. And then looking at the future, there are reasons why certain areas are highlighted in terms of future inundation areas that used to be marshland. Nature just likes to do its own thing. So recognizing that early is probably a wise thing. A large part of this work was also, like Karen mentioned, just getting out to the communities, talking to people about what this really means. What does stormwater mean? What does green infrastructure mean? How does it impact neighborhoods? How does looking at river systems and impacts of pollutants on rivers look like? So I went around, did a lot of demonstration projects, talked to a lot of people, got municipalities excited, had ribbon cuttings with mayors show up, and it was important to get people aware and interested in this work to actually get it to the mainstream. And I'm going to end soon. But this is sort of some work that is really close to my heart. This is work I've done in the Mystic River Watershed. So very soon I realized there were things I could apply from the Charles into other watersheds in the city. This work is in Chelsea. We worked with youth groups and kids who are trying to do environmental justice work, and that is actually where I want to go next. So this is just something I did for fun, a competition that I participated in Cambridge. I figured I should include it since we are so close to it. And working with MIT kids on some really interesting land and water interface. So I'll end with this, which is just sort of where I'm going next. I have been going to a few conferences. Sometimes when you know a little bit about things, people want you to come out and talk to them. And I'm realizing that not a lot of cities who are apparently doing this kind of work are doing everything that maybe they should be. So my goal of taking this year off and really diving into this kind of complexity with all of you here is to be able to tap your brains and get your help to get me where I need to go, is scale this effort to reflect back on how I could be changing things from where I'm coming from and where I'm going. So thank you.